Having wrapped up his trip to Saudi Arabia, South Korean President Yoon is now in Qatar for a summit with Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani to upgrade Seoul's relationship with Doha to a new level. More than 2,300 children have reportedly lost their lives in Gaza because of the deadly conflict between Israel and Hamas, amid too little aid trickling into that enclave to meet the needs of the population. The South Korean authorities have tightened disease prevention measures and vaccinations to contain any further spread of an outbreak of lumpy skin disease that is infecting cattle. It's October 25th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. In Doha, President Yoon continues his Middle East diplomacy in the wake of his trip to Saudi Arabia. He is the first South Korean leader to make a state visit to Qatar, and this trip involves a bilateral summit with Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, where he is expected to ramp up Korea's economic and cultural ties as the two countries reach 50 years of diplomatic relations in 2024. Our Oh Soo-young is traveling with the president and connects with us now for a preview. Hello there, Soo-young. First, let's talk about the significance of this trip. What's the atmosphere like over there?
Good evening, Min. Well, speaking of the weather, well, it's really quite hot here over in Doha, of course, where the South Korean president is now on an official state visit. And his Middle East diplomacy to expand Seoul's partnership with Qatar and Saudi Arabia has created quite a media buzz here in the Gulf region, particularly with the local press in Saudi Arabia giving a very extensive coverage of the president's meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, them driving together in that Mercedes-Benz for the Future Investment Initiative, and some 60 memorandums of understanding and deals spanning energy, infrastructure and so on between the two countries' largest firms. That's created quite a media fervor. The president isn't staying as long here in Qatar as he leaves on his second day, which is today, of course, but anticipation is very much building up. The local press here, around 7 of them, have already reported on the South Korean president's trip here. And to be more specific about his visit to the exhibition yesterday, where South Korea showcased its smart farm technology at the Doha's International Horticultural Expo, which the president, of course, attended. Here's what the top office had to say.
The governments of both countries also plan to revise the Smart Farm Cooperation MOU on the occasion of this state visit and systematically promote specific cooperation projects, such as the creation of a smart farm technology complex.
So smart farming is just one aspect of cooperation going forward. I mean, I'd say that his meeting, President Yoon's meeting with the Qatari leader, is likely to produce surmountable results in elevating the relationship between Seoul and Doha, especially ahead of their 50-year milestone next year, as you said.
And Soo-young, the Qatari leader welcomed President Yoon in an official ceremony before their bilateral talks this morning. What do we expect to come out from this summit?
Of course, it's hard to say for sure, but if President Yoon's interview with the local press ahead of his trip is anything to go by, the two leaders this morning would have been looking to broaden the areas of cooperation from the energy and construction sectors to new emerging industries and increase friendship and exchanges between the two sides as well. Now, economic cooperation is, of course, likely to take up a very big part of their discussions, as Qatar is South Korea's second largest supplier of liquefied natural gas, which greatly contributes to the country's energy security. Meanwhile, South Korean firms have participated in numerous construction projects here in Qatar, including really major national projects such as the Lusa Expressway and the very iconic National Museum of Qatar, of course. With a delegation of around 59 business leaders, President Yoon is going to appeal for greater opportunities, inroads into the Qatari market for South Korean building firms and shipyards, particularly amid growing competition for lucrative contracts here in the country. So we can probably expect to see some memorandums of understanding signed between the two governments and business as well from each side in order to facilitate smoother operations and management. However, the president, upon his visit to Qatar, he's very eager to expand the bilateral partnership as both economies look towards a sustainable post-oil future. So the two leaders will therefore discuss investment, the defence industry, smart farming, culture, and interpersonal exchanges. And they're quite likely to set up some sort of framework for cooperation so that the people of both nations can enjoy more practical benefits in their everyday lives.
So what comes next after the summit? He is, like you said, set to depart for Korea later in the day. I assume he will be pressed for time.
That's right. We're looking at a very packed schedule here. Following the leaders' summit, the signing ceremony of various MOUs and a luncheon between the leaders as well. The South Korean president is going to attend a business forum, and that's expected to have a turnout of about 300 corporate leaders from both sides to really encourage investment and collaboration in sectors like energy, LNG, renewables, as well as biohealth and cultural content as well. And the president's also set to speak with young Qataris as he pays a visit to the country's education city. Now that's home to some of the world's leading institutes, startup incubators and technology parks as well. So he's going to be promoting collaborations between the two countries going forward in future industries. Then he's going to head back to South Korea, wrapping up his almost week-long trip to the Middle East.
Well, it's been an unprecedented state visit to these Middle Eastern countries by a South Korean leader. Well, thank you, Soo-young, for keeping us updated, and travel back safely.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Back in Saudi Arabia, President Yoon put his salesman cap in front of global business leaders as well as Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the Future Investment Initiative dubbed the Davos in the Desert. He vowed to further expand economic partnership with Riyadh. Kim Do-yeon reports.
At this year's Future Investment Initiative, dubbed the Davos in the Desert in Riyadh, President Yoon Suk-yeol appeared as a special guest on Tuesday, walking in with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. There, President Yoon used the stage to promote South Korea as a reliable investment to the participants, made up of 6,000 global business and finance leaders, including the CEOs of JP Morgan and Citigroup.
대한민국의 근면과 신뢰를 확인한 사우디 등 중동 국가들은 더 많은 공사를 맡겼으며 이는 부존 자원도 별다른 기술도 없었던 대한민국이 한강의 기적을 일구어 나가는 출발점이 됐습니다.
He also explained that while South Korea started with infrastructure construction in the Middle East, it's now leading in new technologies, including batteries, semiconductors, and EVs. The keynote speech was followed by an interview session with Scott Snyder, a director for the program on U.S.-Korea policy at the Council on Foreign Relations think tank. While answering questions on bilateral relations with Saudi Arabia, the South Korean president said mutual trust was one of the driving forces behind enhanced cooperation.
그동안 한국은 다른 선진 국가들이 오랜 세월 이룩한 그 산업화를 단기간에 압축해서 성장을 이뤄냈기 때문에 이러한 경험을 사우디와 공유해서 사우디가 추진하고 있는 이 첨단 산업화가 빠른 속도로 이루어질 수 있도록 협력의 폭을 확대할 것입니다.
He also emphasized that people-to-people exchanges will play an important role in keeping the momentum going for the bilateral relations. In the audience, bin Salman listened to the whole interview and showed support for President Yoon. In fact, according to the top office, the Saudi Crown Prince made a surprise visit to the guest house to meet Yoon before the FII and spoke candidly for around 20 minutes, sharing hopes that discussions during the state visit will yield results. He then drove President Yoon to the venue.
While heading to the FII venue, the Saudi Crown Prince said that he hopes next time Yoon visits, the two can be in a Hyundai electric car produced in Saudi Arabia.
As this was the last event of President Yoon's 4-day state visit to Riyadh, afterward, the two said a long goodbye to each other. According to the top office, the two enjoy a great relationship, and the meeting is a sign of a new chapter in Seoul-Riyadh cooperation. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, thousands of children have reportedly lost their lives in Gaza because of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And there's too little aid reaching the enclave to meet the needs of people there, and fuel shortage is threatening aid operations. Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
Calls for a humanitarian pause to allow for safe deliveries of aid are growing as the number of child casualties continues to rise. The Hamas-run health ministry said on Tuesday local time that out of the 5,791 Palestinian deaths since the outbreak of the war, 2,360 were children. And according to the United Nations Children's Fund, the lives of more than 30 Israeli children have been lost. UNICEF has urged for greater humanitarian access to protect civilians and children, saying that the death toll will continue to rise if aid supplies of food, water, medicine, electricity, and fuel are not delivered. There is especially a dire need for fuel, as without it, water cannot be pumped, and generators that power hospital equipment, such as incubators, ventilators, and dialysis machines, will stop. There are currently more than 100 newborns in incubators and around 1,000 people who need dialysis in Gaza hospitals. The World Health Organization also emphasized the need for a humanitarian pause, saying the hospitals have already begun to run out of fuel for generators.
We are appealing, we are pleading, we are on our knees asking for that sustained, scaled up, protected humanitarian operation. We appeal to all those in a situation to make a decision or to influence decision makers to give us the humanitarian space to address this human catastrophe.
But according to the UNRWA, the aid provided has been inadequate, as in the fourth convoy on Tuesday, only 8 out of 20 that were planned arrived. The UN agency did not specify the reasons why 12 aid trucks did not arrive. No fuel arrived on Tuesday, as Israel has not allowed any to enter Gaza over fears that it will be used in the fighting.
So far, fuel has not been allowed into the Strip. Fuel is extremely urgent because without fuel, the trucks themselves cannot move. Without fuel, the generators cannot produce electricity for hospitals, for bakeries, and for the water desalination plants.
The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees warned that operations in the Gaza Strip will be halted late Wednesday if fuel is not provided. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The latest UN Security Council meeting on the Israel-Hamas war featured multiple calls for a ceasefire. But Israel and the U.S. remain opposed to this idea, with Washington only urging a humanitarian pause. Choi Min-jung has more.
The United Nations Security Council gathered on Tuesday to discuss the ongoing war between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas. Speaking first, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated his appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And while Guterres said nothing can justify what Hamas has done, he said its attack did not happen in a vacuum.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
Outraged by Guterres' remarks, the Israeli ambassador to the UN demanded the resignation of the Secretary General.
How can the Secretary General, with his words, justify in any way the terrible atrocities that happened to our civilians, innocent civilians?
High-ranking government officials from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan also called for an immediate ceasefire over concerns over the worsening humanitarian crisis. Washington, however, appealed for a humanitarian pause to protect the civilians in Gaza, which falls short of a full ceasefire.
Food, water, medicine, and other essential humanitarian assistance must be able to flow into Gaza and to the people who need them.
This is the strongest remark made by the U.S. so far. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby on Tuesday also echoed Blinken's proposal during a White House press briefing. However, U.S. officials continue to reject calls for a ceasefire, claiming that it would benefit Hamas by allowing them to recharge for attacks against Israel. Therefore, the consideration of a humanitarian pause does not necessarily mean that Washington has changed its stance, as Blinken backed Israel, maintaining that member states should recognize the right to defend themselves against terrorism. And amid growing fears that the war could widen, Blinken underlined that Washington does not seek conflict with Iran, but warned that it will defend its people and security if Iran attacks U.S. personnel. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
With the spread of lumpy skin disease infecting cattle in Korea, the authorities say they will administer vaccines to all cattle farms in the nation by early next month. Lee Si-hoo explains.
The government announced on Wednesday that it's launching a nationwide vaccination campaign as the number of confirmed cattle farms with outbreaks of lumpy skin disease rose to 29 as of 8 a.m. the same day.
To stabilize the current spread of lumpy skin disease in its early stages, we decided to urgently obtain sufficient vaccine doses to inoculate 4 million cattle here by October 31st. The quantity is enough to inoculate all the cows in the country.
This is in addition to the 540,000 doses currently being administered since the first ever domestic case of the disease was confirmed in the city of Seosan in Chungcheongnam-do province last Friday. The plan is to rapidly distribute and administer vaccines to all cattle farms in South Korea by early next month.
If the nationwide vaccine inoculation is completed as planned, the outbreak of lumpy skin disease is expected to stabilize within November, given the 3 weeks needed to develop antibodies for immunization.
Until the inoculations are completed, the transport of cattle from infected farms around nearby cities and counties will be restricted unless they are being moved to slaughterhouses after prior reporting. Transport of animal waste for manure will be allowed only after careful checkups. The authorities are currently calling cattle at infected farms and conducting preventive inspections and disinfection. Some cities, including Pyeongtaek and Ansong in Gyeonggi-do province, are operating 24-hour control centers to contain the outbreaks. The viral disease only infects cattle and is transmitted by blood-feeding insects. It causes fever and skin nodules as well as death in around 10% of infected cattle. The disease used to be endemic to regions in Africa, but began spreading to the Middle East and Asia from around 2012. Epidemiological surveys are being done to discover how the disease was introduced to the Korean peninsula. Meanwhile, the Agriculture Ministry said that domestically produced beef and milk are safe to consume. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
The number of babies born in Korea hit a record low once again in August. Moon Hae-ryun explains and takes a look at what should be done to help address this chronic problem.
South Korea's population crisis continues as it logged the biggest natural population decline this year. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, 18,984 births were recorded in August, nearly a 13% drop compared to the same month the year before. All major regions saw a decline in the number of births with the single exception of Jeollabuk-do province. This is the lowest number of births for the month of August since data was first compiled in 1981 and the biggest drop on year in 33 months. The number of deaths surpassed the 30,000 mark in the same month for the first time since January this year, for the highest number of deaths in August on record. With the number of births at its lowest and the number of deaths at its highest, the natural population decline came to over 11,000, the biggest drop so far this year. South Korea has been seeing a natural population decline calculated by subtracting the number of deaths from the number of births for 46 months straight. With population decline being a serious issue for the country, experts are saying that the direction of population policies needs to be geared towards encouraging women to give birth to more children.
We've entered a stage where having children is a choice. In order for people to have more than one child, they really need to feel that they can raise their children in a safe environment and that the quality of life in their society is worth living.
Concerns over the country's demographics were heightened even further by the declining number of marriages. August this year saw the lowest number of people wed for that month, coming in at just over 14,000, a drop of 7% on year. The number of registered marriages had seen a slight increase at the beginning of the year on the back of eased COVID-19 restrictions, enabling people to host weddings, but began to show fluctuations in April. Figures dipped for April before rising again in May, only to decline once again through to July. The number of divorces also showed a decline of around 2% on year, coming to just over 8,000. 문혜련, Arirang News.
With an increase in mobile payment service users in Korea, some say the country is already on its way to becoming a cashless society. With this trend, our An Song-jin took a look at how service providers are tailoring their market strategies to attract customers.
As a tech-savvy country, South Korea is already well on its way to a cashless society. This was possible due to mobile or other payment services where customers enter a password to make payments using bank account information previously stored on smartphones.
With the simple shake or swipe of a phone, payment has become increasingly more convenient for smartphone users.
A report released by the Bank of Korea showed that the daily usage of mobile payment services for the first half of 2023 increased by 13.4% compared to the same period last year. There are various mobile payment providers, including big fintech companies, credit card institutions, or mobile service providers, where non-traditional bank tech companies take up nearly half of the digital payment methods.
There is a lot of competition and potential for growth in this market, but in the future it could become a market where only the most convenient payment service provider dominates.
Samsung Electronics, where the user base for their mobile payment service, Samsung Pay, has been rapidly increasing, is looking to replace the physical wallet with a digital one. Credit card companies are also trying to meet the growing needs of customers.
We're focusing on our open payment strategy where we can interchangeably use other credit cards on our platform. We're increasing the number of shops that accept KB Pay through partnerships with big tech companies and franchises while also making it available overseas.
As such, these mobile payment services are now stretching beyond the borders of Korea.
For our users to experience the same convenience outside of Korea, we're focused on expanding the number of available countries on our platform, including cross-border payments where tourists in Korea could also use their own national payment platforms. Our service is available in 48 regions, and we're continuing to conduct research in order to understand user preference.
But venturing overseas brings its own challenges.
As companies target overseas markets, I think an important factor is to be able to easily resolve any disputes with overseas service providers. It's different from when a customer has issues during a domestic transaction.
How these different payment services develop is expected to further drive South Korea towards a completely cashless society. An Song-jin, Arirang News.
Pleasant autumn weather is in full swing here in South Korea. Temperature gaps will narrow down tomorrow as a high-pressure system will be taking over. Morning temperatures will be a touch warmer in Seoul with lows of 15 degrees Celsius. This is considered higher than the seasonal average. Other regions such as Yeosu and Pohang will be warm as well. If you take a look at the satellite imagery, a group of rain clouds are slowly approaching the peninsula. This will cause brief showers for central regions and the surrounding areas for the daytime. As for the amount of rainfall, the Seoul metropolitan area, Gangwon-do and Chungcheong-do provinces will see 5 to 20 millimeters. Jeollado provinces can expect about 5 millimeters, although they will be in the form of scattered outbreaks of rainfall. Thunder and lightning may follow at times. Tomorrow, morning temperatures will range from 10 to 16 degrees nationwide. Seoul will be starting off at 15 degrees. Daytime highs in Seoul will get up to 21 degrees, Gwangju 23, Gyeongju and Jeju will be topping out at 24 degrees. This weekend, sunny skies will make a return, but wide temperature gaps will continue for the time being. Please be extra careful not to catch a cold. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
입니다. 스탠바이. 스타트.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid,
make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Straight through my heart.
웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. South Korea, the U.S. and Japan recently staged what was an unprecedented aerial exercise with Washington's nuclear-capable heavy bomber escorted by aircraft from the three countries. This came amid escalating missile and nuclear threats from North Korea, which is strengthening ties ever more with Russia. Eyes are on when Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to Pyongyang will be, as Moscow's foreign minister made a recent visit to the regime. How are the tensions developing on the peninsula? For more on this, we have invited Dr. Go Myung-hyun, a senior fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Dr. Go.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Dr. Mark Berry, Associate Editor Emeritus of the International Journal on World Peace. Good to see you, Dr. Berry.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Berry, first question. So South Korea, the U.S. and Japan took part in a joint aerial exercise for the first time near the Korean peninsula on Sunday. What was this about and what significance did it have?
Well, you know, there's been a lot of bilateral military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea or the U.S. and Japan. This is the first time ever where there was a joint aerial exercise involving all three countries. And even though it wasn't a lot of aircraft, the centerpiece, of course, was the B-52, which is nuclear capable, but currently not configured to carry nuclear weapons. But it sends a message. And it's all an outgrowth of the Camp David summit in August, where such exercises were an outcome, an agreed outcome of the trilateral summit. And it's manifested in the exercises that we saw just a few days ago. So it's a materialization of the Camp David summit. And I think this is the most important kind of demonstration for the three countries to make, and to keep, actually, particularly at this time, this month in October, to keep the verbiage down. Just let the actions speak louder than words.
All right, I see, Dr. Berry. Well, Dr. Go, as far as I know, the exercise involved fighter jets from the three countries escorting a key U.S. strategic asset, as our Dr. Berry already mentioned, the B-52 bomber. What is so unique about this?
So there are three types of strategic bomber in the United States military. So one is the B-52H version that we're talking about right now. The other two are B-2, which is stealth bomber, and there's also B-1B bomber, which is more updated version of a strategic bomber than B-52, which was deployed for the first time in the 1950s. So, so compared to that, B-52, even though it's nuclear capable, it's one of the oldest ones. But then the other particularity here is that it sends a very strong signal to North Korea. As Dr. Berry had mentioned, this is one out of the three strategic bombers that the United States military has in operation right now. It's one of the two that are actually nuclear capable, B-52 and B-2. And that's the reason why the United States has refrained from deploying B-52 to the Korean Peninsula in exercises because the United States previously was concerned that this could send the wrong signal to North Korea and by extension to China. And the United States didn't want to be seen as a culprit in raising tensions in the region. But now this is actually a reflection of not just the Camp David agreement between the three countries, but also the realization of the summit between South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol as well as the President Biden back in April. The outcome of that was the establishment of the Nuclear Consultative Group, and there's also an agreement there that the United States will deploy on a regular basis this kind of strategic assets. So B-52 is coming here on the following one of the another important naval deployment, which is the deployment of the aircraft carrier earlier this year. So this is we are seeing a series of assurance strengthening measures and deterrence and assurance strengthening measures on the part of the United States, which is a combination of the promises that the United States made through the Nuclear Consultative Group back in April, as well as the Camp David Summit in August.
All right, I see your point. Well, Dr. Go, one more question. Depending on the extent of North Korea's nuclear missile threats, officials say this security cooperation between the three countries might strengthen even more based on what they have agreed upon during the Camp David Summit. In what ways could this be strengthened?
So, for reference, you have to look at not the Camp David agreement. You shouldn't look at the summit outcome. Then back in April, we have to look at the Camp David agreement because this involves the trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. In that statement, the three countries had agreed to not just to conduct joint military exercises. In fact, the statement makes a specific mention of the multi-domain exercises, so which involves not just the air exercises that we have just seen, but also land, naval, as well as cybersecurity and so forth. So we are going to see more exercises like this in other domains. I think we're going to see, for instance, joint anti-missile defense exercises. This is something that came up in the statement, and in fact, the three countries held similar exercises earlier this year and the last year as well. I think what these three countries are going to do is they're going to conduct exercises that are outwardly specifically focused on North Korea, but also they're going to take into consideration other types of threats that are emerging in the region, for instance, from Russia. So I think one of the positive effect about this recent trilateral air exercises will be Russia and China are going to refrain from conducting joint air patrols over the East Sea, which they have been conducting since 2018, which coincided again with the worsening of the relationship between Seoul and Tokyo. So I think in combination, what we're going to see is that Japan, Korea, and the United States are going to essentially send jointly a strong signal, not just to North Korea, but also to China and Russia. And then eventually, I think that we want to see more stability in the region as a result.
All right, I see. Well, shifting our gears a bit to Lavrov's visit to Pyongyang, Dr. Barry. During his reception speech, he said Russia supports North Korean policies to defend its national interest. And experts say this is quite significant as it could be considered as Russia acknowledging Pyongyang's possession of nuclear weapons and its policy to strengthen its capabilities. How do you see this?
I don't see it that way. I think Russia's a long-standing policy going back decades of saying that North Korea has a right to self-defense, that U.S. ROK and Japanese policies tend to be on the aggressive side in the Soviet and now Russian view. And therefore, Lavrov was just reflecting long-standing Soviet and Russian policy. It's the standard kind of thing that someone of Lavrov's position would be expected to say when he's visiting in Pyongyang. So I don't read more into it than that. I think there's a much larger picture going on, both above board and below the surface that we need to keep an eye on.
All right, so it was just a long-standing standard policy.
Now, I see. Well, Dr. Go, though details have not been unveiled, Lavrov spoke with the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un, for about an hour. And there, Kim reportedly expressed Pyongyang's steadfast stand to establish far-reaching and forward-looking plan for the bilateral ties. What does this hint at?
Well, this is very significant in my view. I think one of the speculations that we had, the experts had, before the summit between, not summit, but the meeting between, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Kim Jong-un was that, was whether, this realignment or rapprochement between Moscow and Pyongyang was a one-time thing, whether this, the summit that we have seen in Vladivostok earlier was really a transactional meeting where Russia would offer technology and then maybe other types of economic assistance in exchange for massive military assistance in the form of munitions from North Korea. But so this statement essentially is saying that that's not going to be the case, at least for now. So the Russians and the North Koreans have agreed in principle that the recent tightening of relationship between these two countries is not really a one-time event, that it signals a much longer, stable realignment of objectives. So in a way, this is their way of signaling that they're upgrading their relationship to something that approaches an alliance. So, but then we have to be very careful when you characterize this as an alliance, because alliance means, that at least the alliance that South Korea has with the United States is a much, much higher level. But then for Russia and North Korea to discuss this is that they might be having much closer consultation on their foreign policy objectives as well as the security objectives. And this is where we should be concerned about.
Right, so these words are definitely signifying this long-term rapprochement, like you said. Right, I see. Well, Dr. Berry, many say Lavrov's visit was to arrange a possible trip to Pyongyang by Putin. When do you believe such a visit might take place, and what would it mean if it does happen?
Well, before October 7th, a lot of analysts said that it would happen by the end of the year. But now in the past 2.5 weeks, I think we're in a whole different ballgame globally. I think Putin is actually outstanding for his absence from the scene. The fact that Netanyahu in Israel has not, to my knowledge, been on the phone with Putin, as would have happened in the past under Soviet leaders. The Soviet Union used to play a very strong role in the Middle East. I think at this point, it's actually more up to China to play a role in the Middle East situation. So I think Putin is uncertain how to proceed, and I think, and also he can't even travel as he normally would have because of the ICC warrants out for his arrest in those countries that have signed the ICC treaty. So this is a very much hampered and hand-tied President Putin, and I think it's utterly uncertain even if he will make a visit to Pyongyang. It's simply not a Russian priority right now.
All right, quite uncertain. Now, Dr. Berry, one more question. We have already seen reports saying there has been a transfer of arms between Moscow and Pyongyang. Following their elevated bilateral ties, so we do not know when Putin is going to visit Pyongyang, what further cooperation do you expect to see between the two?
There's only so much ammo that Pyongyang can provide to Moscow, but they need it now. They don't care about next week, the Russians. They need it now. They were successful in repelling a Ukrainian spring and summer offensive. Now we have to see what may happen in the winter. If anything, Putin may look at the situation in the Middle East as a convenient distraction. So I think he wants to make maximum usage of what ammunition North Korea can provide, assuming that most of it even works, because it's probably the oldest ammunition. We're learning the boat routes that go between North Korea and several Soviet ports near Vladivostok. Otherwise, I imagine it all goes across the Trans-Siberian Railroad to depots that are in southern Russia near Ukraine. But I think this is a very short-lived relationship. And at the same time, I think North Korea, they don't really see much of a future to this. They're going to realize that Putin is a fair weather friend, meaning when the weather turns cloudy and rainy and stormy, he's not available and he's not that friendly. And I think this will be borne out in the coming 4 to 6 months.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Berry.
Well, Dr. Go, staying on the when we are talking about relationship between Russia and North Korea, we cannot leave out China. And so it seems China is quite distancing itself from what is happening between Russia and North Korea. What could be China's view on this matter?
Well, it's going to be quite interesting. I think there are two layers to Chinese view on the recent tightening of relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang. At least officially or like externally, China seems to be, as you pointed out, seems to be distancing itself from this development, which is taking place right next door from China. But I think underneath, I think China is pretty positive about this development. So for China's position in the world is quite different from Russia, let alone North Korea. Russia is very much isolated from the international community, so is North Korea. So these two countries are being regarded as rogue states which don't abide by the established international norms, and clearly they don't respect the values such as human rights and stuff. But then China is being seen as a moral responsible country among these three, and in fact has a lot of influence economically and politically and diplomatically. And China likes that. I think China wants to be respected, wants to be positioning itself in the position of influence. And China understands that if China gets too close to these two countries, Russia and North Korea, they might lose that influence. And then in the worst case scenario, China might be held responsible for the misbehavior on the part of Russia and North Korea. So, but at the same time, China is part of this axis of anti-Western countries. We're thinking about three authoritarian countries here. What unites them is the common negative view about the United States. So in a sense, China probably thinks that on the other hand, weakening of the United States, the United States being occupied by these kind of challenges around the world, only makes China better off strategically. So in that sense, China doesn't want to prevent Russia and North Korea from getting close, or even like carrying out provocation that could lead to instability in the region, but not too much. So China is essentially trying to position itself in a way that maximizes the influence that it has in the global community with the United States, with the Western countries, and South Korea and Japan as well. But at the same time, in the long run, he wants to see spoilers such as Russia and North Korea causing trouble to the United States and the West. So in that sense, China is a balancing job going on right now. So I think that's the reason why it doesn't officially celebrate or approve what's going on between Russia and North Korea. But then at the same time, it's very clear that it's in their interest to see Russia being helped by North Korea and vice versa.
Right. So at least China is refraining from making some comments regarding this ties between Russia and North Korea. But regarding this, some experts say that South Korea needs to manage its relationship with China in order to prevent China's active involvement or engagement in this cooperation. What's your view on this?
So that's the thing. I think whenever we discuss about China's role in the Korean Peninsula, we have this I would say, unwanted effect of empowering China in South Korea's global and regional affairs. So we don't know what we have this understanding that it's in China's interest to protect North Korea, to ensure that North Korea remains essentially capable of threatening South Korea and the United States. And so that's going to be their long-term interest. But at the same time, we should realize by now that it's not in the interest of China to engage in denuclearization of North Korea. We tried that before. China subscribes to the idea of non-proliferation, but hasn't done enough, has consistently done it hasn't done enough consistently in terms of denuclearization. So I think we should be very careful about engaging China, especially bilaterally between us, South Korea and China, because we might get into this trap of empowering China's role in the Korean Peninsula unintentionally. So I think this is the reason why we should be very steadfast and principled when it comes to our approach towards China, and it should be done in conjunction with our allies. So I think that this is a very important principle that we should abide by when we deal with China.
All right, I see. Great advice from Dr. Go. Now, Dr. Berry, before we wrap up, I would like to briefly ask about the impact that geopolitical tension in the Middle East region could have on the Korean Peninsula. Israel is saying it will begin a ground invasion, which could result in more countries, including the U.S., becoming directly involved. How that affects South Korea's defense posture against North Korea?
Everything has a ripple effect. This period is very reminiscent of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. I remember in 1989 being in the staffing a senior U.S. delegation of former State Department and Pentagon officials to Prime Minister Shamir's office in Jerusalem, and he reminisced very much about how grateful he was for U.S. assistance at that time and how close the world had come to a global or wider war. So I see this situation right now with tremendous trepidation. You have two U.S. carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. You have, in fact, one of the carrier groups is going to shift to the Persian Gulf. The stated purpose, according to Secretary Blinken, is to ward off the possibility of Hezbollah joining into the fray by firing up to 150,000 of its rockets at northern Israel. And also you had overnight Israel striking several locations in southern Syria, killing several Syrian personnel. So it's the possibility of a wider war, including one in which President Assad of Syria calls up President Putin and asks for protection from the Americans, is very great. So when you ask about how this will affect the South Korea's defense posture against North Korea, all I could say is that events may drown us all out. It will sweep us in. We have to be very, very careful with what we say and how we behave. And President Biden is extremely cautious right now because I personally believe he does not see the current Israeli government that took office in January as being a responsible government in the traditional sense of the word, and could get the United States into a lot more trouble. And that's why you see the Biden administration pushing for a more slow-going approach, one in which humanitarian aid can be opened up to Israel, to Gaza rather, and also to see the more hostages released. The United States is very, very afraid of being enmeshed in a much wider conflict, one in which Israel will not be as responsible as in 1973 in its handling of that war. I can go on, but that's the basic picture that I see.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Berry. One more question. According to some reports, discussions have begun involving some countries, including Saudi Arabia, rebuilding the Gaza Strip after the situation stabilizes in the region. Given the ties between South Korea and Saudi Arabia, is there any possibility Seoul could be asked to play a role?
Well, that's way over the horizon on one hand, but on the other hand, I think it's extraordinarily significant that President Yoon has made the trip at this time in the middle of this Middle East crisis to visit Saudi Arabia, to meet with MBS, to meet with the Qatari Emir, as he has done this morning. South Korea is portraying itself as the dependable power in the world. And so, although I fear that Gaza will be utterly destroyed, because Saudi Arabia was in the process of normalizing relations with Israel, and only the events of October 7th has forestalled it, but MBS has said that he'd like to pursue it at the end of the war. Some experts are postulating that the Saudi money will be involved in the rebuilding of Gaza as part of Saudi-Israeli normalization. And it seems to me unnatural, after President Yoon's visit, to have the most significant construction component taken up by the South Koreans. But more than that, South Korea can be in the position of being a peacemaker and unifier in the region, which is needed more than ever, more than at any other time in the history of the crises between Israel and the Palestinians and the wider Arab world.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Berry. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Berry, for your time and insights.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Go, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Animation, loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach